Welcome, dear friends. What if MrBeast lived in the Middle Ages? Imagine it, a world of stone castles and torchlit squares, where hunger and hope walked side by side, and suddenly a man unlike any other appears. MrBeast does not bring swords or crowns. He brings generosity, kindness, and games that change lives. In a time of shadows, he carries a flame of joy. If these myths and dreams bring you peace, remember to subscribe and leave a like. And tell me in the comments, from where in the world are you listening tonight, and at what hour does this story find you? Now, lower the lights, release the weight of the day, and open your heart to a medieval dream. For tonight, together, we step into the tale of what if MrBeast lived in the Middle Ages,
The night was quiet, heavy with the weight of forgotten centuries. The moon hung low over a world that seemed suspended in silence, its silver glow bathing the stone towers of an ancient kingdom. Mist curled between the cobbled streets, weaving around crooked wooden homes, where candlelight flickered faintly through shuttered windows. Somewhere in the distance, the faint toll of a church bell carried across the valley, echoing like a ghost of time. And then, without warning, a ripple spread through the silence. It was as though the fabric of the world had been brushed aside, a doorway opening where none should exist. From that strange, shimmering light stepped a figure no one of this realm could understand. A man in modern clothes, eyes alive with wonder, carrying with him not swords or shields, but an energy that promised something extraordinary. It was Jimmy Donaldson, known in our time as MrBeast. He looked around, his sneakers pressing into the damp cobblestones, his breath rising into the cool medieval air. The world he entered was not filled with neon lights and roaring crowds, but with whispers of hunger, with the cautious gazes of peasants who peeked out from their doorways. The smell of wood smoke drifted through the night, mingling with the sharp scent of damp earth. The great castle of the kingdom loomed in the distance, its walls lit only by torchlight, shadows dancing like watchful spirits upon the stones. MrBeast stood there for a long moment, as if trying to take it all in. His eyes widened at the sight of horses pulling wooden carts piled with hay, at the sound of armor clinking as tired guards patrolled the gate, at the sight of barefoot children clutching loaves of bread no bigger than their hands. He whispered to himself, half in disbelief, "So this is it. The Middle Ages." Yet, though his world had changed, something in him remained constant. The spark that defined him, that desire to create, to surprise, to bring joy, glowed just as brightly here. He reached into the satchel slung across his shoulder, not with weapons or maps, but with small purses of golden coins that shimmered in the dim light. The villagers, cautious at first, drew nearer. A woman with weary eyes, clutching a child to her chest, stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Good sir, who are you?" MrBeast smiled. Not the smile of a noble knight or a king, but the easy, familiar grin of someone who had spent his life finding ways to lift others. "I'm just someone who likes to give," he said softly. And then, before their astonished eyes, he poured gold into the open hands of those who had never held more than a single coin. The children gasped, the men muttered prayers of thanks, and the square filled with murmurs of disbelief. One old man whispered, "Surely, this must be magic." But it was not sorcery. It was simply generosity, translated into a time where even a single loaf of bread meant survival. The church bells rang again, heavier now, as though announcing this stranger's arrival. And the word spread quickly. From the tavern to the marketplace, from the blacksmith's forge to the castle walls, they spoke of the man who had appeared with gifts in his hands and light in his eyes. As he walked through the narrow streets, torches flickering around him, MrBeast felt the pulse of the kingdom. He saw hunger, but he also saw hope. He saw fear, but he also saw the quiet spark of curiosity. This land, heavy with hardship, seemed ready for something different, something it had never known. He paused at the base of the castle hill, staring up at its towers lost in the drifting fog. Somewhere in that fortress slept a king, unaware that destiny had just shifted. Somewhere in the huts behind him, peasants whispered of miracles. And somewhere in MrBeast's heart, the idea began to form. If I could bring joy to millions in my own world, what could I do for this one? The night deepened. The stars seemed to listen. And though he had only just arrived, MrBeast knew that the Middle Ages were about to witness something entirely new. Not the clash of swords, but the triumph of generosity. And so, his journey began. Morning came slowly to the kingdom. A pale sun rose above the mist, painting the castle walls with a fragile light. The streets below were already stirring, peasants carrying empty baskets to a market that had little to offer, children with hollow eyes tugging at their mothers' skirts, and weary men whose hands were rough from labor, yet whose tables remained bare. The kingdom was tired, its granaries low, its wells shallow. Hunger lingered in the air like a shadow that refused to lift. Even the church bells seemed heavy, ringing not with joy, but with sorrow. MrBeast watched from the steps of an old stone fountain, his gaze drifting over the faces of those who passed. He saw men trading scraps of bread for scraps of hope, women whispering prayers over bowls that held only broth. He could feel it, the ache of a people who had gone too long without plenty. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. He rose, the satchel on his shoulder heavier now with more than gold. Through the strange doorway of time, he had brought what he thought might be needed. Sacks of fine flour, jars of honey that glowed like captured sunlight, and salted meats wrapped carefully to last through the hardest days. He gathered the villagers in the square, calling softly so as not to frighten them. One by one they came, cautious at first, eyes filled with doubt. And then, with a smile, he opened the satchel. From it, he drew out the first great sack of flour, its white dust spilling into the air like a cloud of promise. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Women stepped forward, reaching out with trembling hands, their minds already filling with thoughts of bread, rising warm in their ovens. Next came the honey, thick, golden, glistening as the morning sun struck the jars. Children pressed closer, eyes wide, their hunger momentarily replaced by wonder. For many, it was the first time they had seen such sweetness. Then, with a strength born not of knightly training but of simple resolve, MrBeast lifted bundles of salted meat. He laid them gently at the villagers' feet, and the scent of preservation, smoke and earth and spice, filled the square. The silence that followed was not emptiness, but awe. And then it broke, softly at first, with tears. A woman fell to her knees, clutching the sack of flour as though it were treasure. An old man bowed deeply, murmuring thanks in a voice cracked with age. Children laughed, a sound rare and precious in a town that had forgotten how to smile. MrBeast did not speak of reward, nor of price. He only said, "Eat well, sleep with peace. Tomorrow will not be as hard as yesterday." The villagers could hardly understand his words, for his accent was strange to their ears, his tone unlike that of any lord or priest. But the meaning was clear. Here stood a man who gave not because he must, but because he wished to. And so the bread was baked, filling the village with the warm, rich scent of life itself. Honey dripped onto wooden tables, catching the light like amber. Children gnawed at meat with eager hands, while their parents, tears in their eyes, whispered of blessings. As night fell again, the square glowed with more than torchlight. It glowed with gratitude, with relief, with the gentle hum of contentment. For the first time in many winters, bellies were full. For the first time in too long, dreams would not be haunted by hunger. From the castle above, the king's men watched in silence. They had seen lords hoard and kings demand, but never had they seen a stranger give so freely. Some whispered that this man was touched by the divine, others that he carried magic no scholar could explain. Yet all agreed on one thing. The kingdom had changed, and in the quiet of his own heart, MrBeast knew that this was only the beginning. For if hunger could be eased with simple gifts, what else might be possible? What other joys, what other wonders might he bring to a world that had never known such kindness? As the villagers drifted to sleep that night, their windows glowing faintly with candlelight, the air seemed lighter. The moon rose above roofs and towers, shining not on sorrow, but on hope reborn. And MrBeast, sitting once more by the old fountain, gazed at the sky. He felt the stars watching, as though approving. He whispered to himself, "In every age, joy is the greatest treasure." The square fell silent, and the kingdom, for the first time in years, slept well. The town was no longer silent. The square, where only days before hollow faces and empty hands had gathered in despair, now shimmered with a warmth that few had ever known. Fires glowed in stone hearths, their smoke drifting lazily upward to mingle with the low clouds above. Wooden tables stretched across the cobbles, so long and heavy that they seemed to form a bridge between the weary past and a hopeful future. The villagers worked side by side, arranging loaves of fresh bread in neat rows, placing jars of honey so golden that they seemed to hold fragments of sunlight, and carrying platters of roasted meat that filled the air with a scent so rich that even the castle guards found themselves drifting closer. MrBeast moved quietly among them, his presence no longer strange but welcome, his smile lighting faces more deeply than any torch. He had not come as a lord or king, but as something rarer, a giver without demand. When he placed bread into the hands of a child, or lifted a heavy barrel so that the old men could rest, whispers followed him. Whispers that spread from door to door, from hut to hall. He has brought joy back to us. As dusk fell, the feast began. The people gathered at the tables, their cheeks warmed by the glow of firelight, their voices rising in a gentle hum. Children dipped pieces of bread into honey and laughed when the sweetness stuck to their lips. Mothers pressed food into the hands of their children with tears in their eyes, for it had been too long since they had seen them eat without worry. Men raised wooden cups of ale and clapped each other on the shoulders, their laughter booming across the square like a drumbeat of life. Music soon followed, fiddles carved from simple wood, flutes that sang like the wind, and drums that kept the rhythm of many hearts beating as one. But MrBeast had promised them more than food. He had promised them something no one in the Middle Ages had ever seen. Games unlike any played before. When the moon rose higher, silvering the rooftops and painting the castle walls in pale light, he stood at the head of the square and lifted his voice so that all could hear. "Tonight," he said gently, his words translated through a villager who stood beside him, "we do not only eat and drink. Tonight we play, and those who play shall not leave empty-handed." The villagers exchanged glances. Games were not new to them. There had always been contests of strength, of song, of wit. But the way his eyes gleamed, the way his tone carried both mystery and kindness, told them that this would be different. Slowly, they gathered in the open space of the square, torches planted in the ground casting long shadows. Children clung to their mothers' skirts, men loosened their belts, and women whispered with excitement. The night felt alive with expectation. The first game began with the ringing of the great church bell. A monk, robed in gray, stood atop the steps and pulled the rope, letting the sound echo deep into the valley. MrBeast explained the rule in simple words. When the bell rang, the players would walk forward across the square. When the bell fell silent, they must stop. If any were seen moving after the silence, they would step aside. It was a game of stillness and patience, not of swords or strength. At first, the villagers laughed. The children darted forward eagerly, only to stumble when the bell ceased and their feet froze mid-step. Men teased one another, trying to hold back laughter while standing like statues. The torches flickered, shadows froze, and then danced again when the bell rang once more. One by one, players stepped aside, smiling, laughing, clapping the shoulders of their friends. No one was punished, no one shamed. It was only joy, wrapped in suspense, the echo of the bell guiding their steps. When the last group reached the far edge of the square without faltering, cheers erupted. MrBeast rewarded them not with gold, but with small jars of honey, each glistening like treasure under the moonlight. The winners lifted them high, and even those who had been set aside laughed, tasting drops of sweetness shared freely among friends. The second game was quieter, more delicate. From a basket, MrBeast drew thin sheets of baked dough, brittle and fragile, coated with lines of honey hardened into shapes of stars and circles. Each player was handed one piece, and the rule was simple: break away the edges and free the shape without shattering it. The villagers bent over their honeycombs, the firelight catching the beads of sweat on their foreheads. Children poked carefully, their tongues between their teeth, while old men tried to steady their trembling fingers. The square was filled with silence, broken only by nervous laughter and the occasional snap of dough. Those who broke their shapes groaned, but none were sad. For at the end of the contest, MrBeast gave each of them bread dipped in honey, saying, "Here, no one loses." The third and final game filled the night with a golden glow. Torches were handed to the remaining players, their flames crackling gently against the still air. MrBeast told them, "Hold your torch high. Do not let it fall. The last flame standing shall bring light not only for you, but for all your people." The villagers stood in a wide circle, their arms raised, torches lifted. Minutes passed, then hours, as the flames swayed with the breeze. One by one, tired arms lowered, but each time a torch fell, the crowd cheered and embraced the player, celebrating endurance rather than defeat. The square grew hushed as only a few torches remained, their light flickering brighter against the deepening dark. At last, when only one torch remained held high, the crowd erupted in a cheer that rolled through the streets and up the castle walls. MrBeast stepped forward, taking the torch gently from the victor's hand, and placed at their feet a great chest filled not with gold, but with sacks of flour, jars of honey, and bundles of meat. "This," he declared softly, "is for your village, for your families, for the year to come. You carried the flame, and now you carry light into their lives." The people wept, but it was not sorrow that brought the tears. It was gratitude, deep and overflowing, a feeling long forgotten in a world of hunger and hardship. Even those who had not won crowded around, touching the chest, tasting the sweetness of a future made brighter. For in truth, MrBeast had ensured that none would leave empty-handed. Each family received bread, honey, or meat, and the square echoed with laughter as children carried their prizes home, eyes shining in the glow of the torches. As the feast wound down, the music softened. Families drifted away to their cottages, holding their treasures close, whispering prayers of thanks as they laid their children to sleep. The torches burned lower, their flames dancing in the cool midnight breeze. MrBeast sat quietly at the edge of the square, watching the last of the villagers disappear into the night. Above him, the moon sailed high, its silver light spilling over stone and timber, blessing all it touched. For a long while, he did not move. He listened to the silence, to the faint rustle of leaves, to the steady crackle of dying flames. He thought of the world he had come from, a world of cameras and lights, of noise and endless motion. And he thought of this world, so simple and so burdened, yet so capable of joy when given the chance. At last, as the stars wheeled slowly across the sky, he whispered to himself, "Generosity is the same in every age, whether gold or bread, whether coins or kindness. Giving always brings light." And with that, he closed his eyes, letting the night wrap around him like a cloak. The kingdom, too, slept deeply, their dreams filled not with hunger, but with hope. Morning came with a softness that seemed almost unreal, as if the world itself had grown weary of shadows. The mist parted gently, revealing the outlines of the valley where the town lay nestled, its rooftops glistening faintly with dew. Birds stirred among the branches, their songs cautious yet hopeful, as though they too sensed the change that had settled over the kingdom. For after the feast, after the games, there was no longer only hunger and silence. There was laughter, and there was the lingering memory of torches burning bright in the night. MrBeast rose with the sun, his mind already filled with a vision. He had fed their bodies, lifted their spirits, given them moments of joy. But he knew that joy, like fire, flickered and faded unless fed with something lasting. What this kingdom needed was not only gifts for today, but a foundation for tomorrow. And so his thoughts turned to the river. The river flowed broad and restless at the edge of the town, its waters flashing silver beneath the morning light. For generations, it had been both friend and enemy. It gave fish, it watered fields, but it divided the people. On one side lay fertile farmland. On the other, thick woods that held timber and wild game. Crossing was treacherous. A few scattered boats, fragile and often overturned, carried goods back and forth. But many lives had been lost to its current. Children were kept far from its banks, and mothers whispered warnings as they drew water. MrBeast stood upon its shore, listening to the roar of its waters, and saw not danger, but possibility. He turned to the villagers who had followed him, curious, their faces open and waiting. "This river," he said slowly, letting his words be carried by a translator, "does not have to divide you. It can join you. We will build a bridge." The villagers exchanged startled glances. A bridge was the dream of kings, not peasants. Bridges meant armies, wealth, labor beyond what simple folk could imagine. But when MrBeast smiled, the impossible seemed suddenly near. He knelt by the children who stood closest, pointing to the far bank where sunlight gilded the tops of tall trees. A bridge of wood, strong and wide, where you can walk without fear, where carts may cross, where the two halves of your world meet as one. and so the work began. From the forest came the sound of axes biting into oak, steady and rhythmic like the heartbeat of the earth. Men labored in pairs, their hands gripping handles worn smooth, their bodies swaying in unison as each tree fell with a groan that echoed through the hills. Women gathered branches, stripped bark, carried bundles of twigs and rope. Children fetched water, their laughter ringing between the trunks as they filled buckets to cool the sweating workers. Even the old found tasks, sharpening tools, shaping pegs, singing songs to keep the rhythm steady. MrBeast worked among them, his strength not in muscle alone, but in the energy of his presence. He lifted beams, steadied ropes, held ladders firm as carpenters climbed. He did not command like a lord, but joined like a brother, his laughter mixing with theirs, his encouragement lightening the heaviest loads. Day by day, the bridge took form. Great timbers were driven into the riverbed, hammered deep with stones and mallets until they stood like sentinels against the current. Across them, planks were laid, smoothed by calloused hands, bound with ropes of hemp and strands of iron. The sound of work filled the air, the thud of hammers, the creak of wood, the splash of water against posts. It was not harsh or hurried, but steady, a rhythm as ancient as creation itself. At night, when the labor ceased, torches were lit along the half-finished span. Their flames shimmered on the dark water, painting golden paths across the waves. Families gathered at the riverbank, watching in awe as the bridge stretched farther each day, like a ribbon of hope unrolling toward the horizon. Some whispered prayers of thanks, others sang softly, their voices mingling with the murmuring current. The king in his castle heard of the work, and though his counselors scoffed, calling it folly, he himself came secretly to see. Cloaked and hooded, he stood upon a hill and watched as peasants labored with joy instead of dread, as children danced upon the shore while beams were raised. He had ruled long and seen many things, but never had he seen such unity born not of fear, but of kindness. The days turned to weeks, and still the work continued. The villagers grew weary, yet their weariness was sweet, for each evening they could see what their hands had built. The bridge stretched farther, its timbers strong, its planks sturdy, and though storms swept across the land, though winds howled and rain lashed the valley, the structure stood, defiant, against the river's rage. MrBeast himself waded into the waters during the worst of it, steadying posts with ropes tied around his waist, his laughter carrying even as the waves foamed around him. His courage lit the others, and none faltered. At last, on a morning when the sky blushed pink with dawn, the final plank was laid. The villagers gathered, holding their breath as the last hammer struck, the last peg driven home. Silence fell, heavy and holy, as they looked upon the finished span. It was more than wood. It was a pathway of hope, wide enough for carts, strong enough for herds, safe enough for children. A bridge not of kings, but of people, built by their hands, yet inspired by one who had come from another time. MrBeast stood at its center, the river flowing swift and bright beneath his feet. He raised a torch high, and its flame blazed against the morning sky. The villagers cheered, their voices rolling like thunder through the valley. Some wept openly, clutching one another, for the bridge meant more than crossing. It meant connection. It meant future. That night, as the torches were lit once more along its length, the bridge glowed like a ribbon of fire stretched across the water. People crossed slowly, reverently, carrying baskets of bread, bundles of herbs, gifts to share with neighbors they had once seen only from afar. The square filled again with music, not as grand as the feast, but sweeter still, for it was born of pride and peace. MrBeast watched from the riverbank, his heart quiet. He thought of his own world, of cities and towers of glass, of bridges of steel stretching across bays. But none had ever felt like this. None had carried such weight of meaning. Here, in the Middle Ages, a bridge was not only timber and rope, it was light, shining upon waters that had once divided. When the villagers drifted to their homes, when the music faded and the torches dimmed, the bridge remained, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Its shadow lay long upon the water, a promise whispered by wood and stone, that tomorrow and the day after, this place would know unity. And so the kingdom slept, the sound of the river no longer a threat, but a lullaby. Above it all, the bridge stood silent and strong, a testament to what kindness could build, in any age, in any world. The night returned with a silver stillness, the kind of quiet that seemed to hold its breath before something wondrous was about to unfold. Above the town, the castle loomed like a giant carved from stone, its towers reaching into the star-flecked sky. Torches flickered along its battlements, and shadows moved slowly across its walls, as if even the ancient fortress was curious about what would happen within its gardens. The villagers had been summoned there by MrBeast himself, their hearts filled with a mixture of awe and anticipation. For he had promised them a game unlike any they had ever known, a contest not of sword or shield, but of wit, patience, and discovery. The castle gates creaked open with a groan that echoed through the valley, and the people filed inside, their furs and cloaks brushing against the cold iron. Children clutched lanterns nearly as big as themselves, their eyes wide as they peered into the courtyard beyond. The garden stretched out in twisting paths, bordered by hedges tall and ancient, their leaves shimmering with dew. Statues of forgotten kings stood watch in silent rows, their stone faces bathed in torchlight, their eyes fixed upon the maze of green. MrBeast stood at the center, a torch in his hand, his figure lit warmly against the cool night air. He greeted the villagers not as subjects, but as companions, his voice gentle, carrying a playful rhythm. Through the translator, he explained the rules. Hidden somewhere within the garden lay a great chest. Whoever found it first would not keep the treasure only for themselves, but would win plenty for the entire village. Bread, honey, meat, and cloth, gifts enough to carry the people through another harsh season. Yet along the way, smaller chests had also been placed, each holding tokens of kindness. A loaf for a family, a jar of honey for a child, a candle for a home. No one would leave empty-handed, he promised. The villagers whispered in amazement. Never had they been invited into the king's garden to play. Never had they been told that treasure was not only for nobles or knights, but for common hands, for children and mothers, for farmers and smiths. The torches along the paths were lit, casting long ribbons of light and shadow, and with a single signal, the hunt began. They moved in groups at first, families staying close, neighbors whispering strategies as though they had become soldiers in some grand campaign. Children darted down narrow paths, their lanterns bobbing like fireflies as they giggled and searched beneath hedges. The statues loomed over them, solemn and unmoving, their stone robes streaked with moss, as if they too waited to see who would find the prize. The air was filled with the sound of footsteps on gravel, the soft rustle of leaves, the occasional gasp of delight when a small chest was found and opened with trembling fingers. One family discovered a wooden box tucked beneath the roots of an ancient oak. Inside lay a bundle of bread still warm, wrapped in cloth, its scent drifting into the cool air. They lifted it high, laughter bursting forth, and shared pieces with those around them before continuing deeper into the maze. A group of children uncovered a jar of honey resting inside a hollow statue, its golden glow shining even brighter than the torches. They licked the sweetness from their fingers, their giggles echoing through the night like bells. MrBeast wandered among them, his torch casting wide arcs of light, his smile steady. He offered encouragement, pointed out hidden corners where few thought to look, and clapped his hands in delight when another chest was found. He was not a king watching subjects, nor a judge ruling over competitors. He was simply present, sharing in their joy, reminding them that the game was not about winning alone, but about discovering wonder in unexpected places. As the night deepened, the garden grew more mysterious. Mist drifted from the river below, curling between hedges and wrapping statues in ghostly veils. The torches flickered, their flames bowing to the cool breath of midnight. The villagers pressed on, their lanterns bobbing like a constellation come to earth, each flame carrying a piece of hope. At last, near the farthest corner of the maze, a group of weary farmers stumbled upon something larger than all the rest. Half buried beneath ivy and stone, its iron hinges rusted, lay the great chest. They called out, their voices ringing like a trumpet through the garden, and others rushed to join them. Together, with hands blistered from labor but strong from unity, they dragged the chest into the open. The crowd gathered around as MrBeast approached, his torch raised high. With a steady hand, he struck the lock, and the chest creaked open. Gasps rippled outward as the firelight revealed its contents. Sacks of flour stacked neatly, jars of honey glistening like amber, wheels of cheese wrapped in cloth, bundles of herbs tied with twine, and salted meats enough to fill 100 tables. It was not gold, nor jewels, nor crowns. It was life itself, sustenance, a treasure greater than any king's ransom. The villagers erupted in cheers, their voices rising into the night sky until even the stars seemed to shimmer with delight. Children clapped their hands, men raised their arms, women embraced one another with tears streaming down their cheeks. The farmers who had found the chest stood tall, but when MrBeast handed them the first sack of flour, they shook their heads and placed it back into the chest. "It is not ours alone," they said. "It belongs to us all." And so, the bounty was divided. Families carried home what they needed, sharing with neighbors, ensuring no one was left with empty hands. The garden, once a place of solemn statues and silent hedges, was now alive with joy, filled with laughter and the clinking of jars, the rustle of cloth, the low hum of songs rising from grateful lips. MrBeast watched from the edge of the crowd, his heart at peace. The game had not been about who would win, but about how they would come together, how they would discover that treasure was sweeter when shared. He lifted his torch one last time, its flame glowing warmly against the mist. "In every world," he whispered to himself, "kindness is the greatest prize." As the villagers left the garden, their lanterns glowing softly against the night, the castle itself seemed changed. The statues no longer looked stern, but almost watchful, as if guarding not treasure, but joy. The torches flickered low, and the mist thickened once more, but the memory of the hunt lingered like a dream. The kingdom slept that night with bellies full, cupboards stocked, and hearts alight with wonder. And in the silence, beneath the gaze of stars and stone kings, the garden held the echo of laughter, a sound as precious as any jewel, as eternal as any crown. The day after the treasure hunt dawned soft and quiet, the kind of morning where even the birds seemed to pause their songs, as though the world itself was listening. Mist still lingered along the river, drifting lazily across the bridge that gleamed with dew. But in the town below, the air was lighter than it had ever been. Doors opened, not with weariness, but with the sound of laughter spilling into the streets. Windows glowed with the warm fragrance of bread. Ovens fired with flour from the great chest, and children's voices carried sweet and bright as bells as they shared honey and fruit. Word had traveled faster than any herald. From villages beyond the valley, people whispered of the stranger who had brought gifts, who had built a bridge, who had filled stomachs and hearts alike. They came on foot and by cart, drawn by curiosity and hope, and when they entered the town, they were not turned away. For the villagers who had once guarded their meager bread now welcomed strangers to their tables, eager to share, eager to give in the spirit they had been shown. By evening, the square was alive again. Torches lined the cobbles, flickering golden in the cooling air, and the people gathered with instruments and voices, ready to offer something no chest could hold: their gratitude. MrBeast sat quietly near the old fountain, his hands folded loosely, his eyes soft as he watched them assemble. He had not asked for thanks, had not expected song or ceremony. But the villagers, from the youngest child to the oldest elder, carried with them a deep need to give back, not with gold or treasure, but with the only wealth they had: their stories, their music, their hearts. It began with a single voice. An old woman, bent with years but bright with spirit, lifted her song into the night. Her voice was cracked yet steady, like firewood popping in the hearth, and she sang of winters past when hunger pressed close, of fields left barren, of nights when mothers wept. Yet her words turned slowly, gently, to the present, to the tables now heavy with bread, to the laughter of children, to the bridge that bound one shore to another. Her song wove sorrow and hope together, and when it ended, the crowd was silent, their eyes glistening with tears that needed no shame. Then came the children. They had gathered in small groups, lanterns in their hands, and began to sing around, their voices light as feathers. They sang of honey dripping golden, of games played by torchlight, of treasure chests filled not with jewels, but with simple joys. Their song was clumsy, their notes uneven, but it was the purest music, and as their laughter bubbled between verses, the whole square joined in, clapping gently, swaying with the rhythm. The men followed, their voices deep and steady, blending into a chorus that filled the square like rolling thunder softened by distance. They sang of the river that no longer divided them, of the bridge that gleamed even under storm clouds, of the stranger who worked beside them, with sweat on his brow. They sang not of kings or wars, but of kindness, and their song echoed against the castle walls as though the stones themselves were listening. Women added their voices, weaving harmonies that rose like smoke into the starry sky. Their song spoke of hearths rekindled, of laughter in kitchens, of the peace that had returned to their dreams. The crowd swayed, and soon all voices joined as one, old and young, strong and frail, every soul adding their note to the tapestry of sound. It was not perfect, yet it was whole, a single heartbeat of gratitude pulsing through the night. MrBeast listened, his chest tightening with a feeling he could not name. In his world, he had given away riches, built grand contests, created moments seen by millions. But here, in this quiet medieval town, there were no cameras, no lights, no recording, but the memory of those who sang. And yet, this was more powerful than anything he had ever known. When the music faded, the villagers did not leave. They began to tell stories, One by one, their voices hushed, their words carrying in the still air. A blacksmith spoke of his father, lost to the river's current years ago, and how now his son could cross the bridge without fear. A mother told of nights spent hungry so her children might eat, and how now she could watch them sleep with full bellies. A child, her face sticky with honey, told of the moment she found a jar hidden in the garden, and how sweet it tasted on her tongue. Each story was simple, but together they built something vast, a tapestry of gratitude richer than any king's hall. Torches burned lower, their flames bowing like tired dancers. The moon climbed higher, spreading silver across the rooftops. Some villagers lit small candles, placing them along the bridge, each flame a prayer of thanks, until the span glowed like a river of stars laid across the water. Families huddled together, children falling asleep against their parents' shoulders, their dreams already carrying the songs they had heard. MrBeast rose at last, walking slowly to the center of the square. He raised his hand, and the crowd grew quiet, their faces turned toward him in the golden half-light. "I came here by chance," he said softly, his voice steady but low, carried by the translator to every ear. "I do not belong to this time, yet you welcomed me. I gave what I could, but tonight you have given me something greater. You have shown me that kindness is never small. It is a flame that spreads, lighting one heart after another, until all are warmed." The villagers murmured softly, their eyes shining, some nodding, some weeping. MrBeast bowed his head, not as a lord or master, but as one who shared in their humanity. Then he stepped back, letting the moment belong to them, to their voices, their gratitude, their unity. The night stretched on gently, each moment slower than the last, as though time itself wished to linger. The villagers drifted to their homes, carrying sleeping children, cradling loaves of bread, whispering softly to one another. One by one, the torches were extinguished, smoke curling upward like fading prayers. The bridge still glowed with its line of candles, reflecting in the dark waters below, a quiet promise against the silence. MrBeast remained by the fountain long after all had gone. He listened to the hush of the square, to the murmur of the river, to the soft rustle of leaves. The stars wheeled slowly above him, patient and eternal. He thought of his own world, of bright lights and ceaseless noise, of contests watched by millions. And he thought of this world, quiet and unrecorded, yet filled with a beauty no number could measure. When at last he closed his eyes, the kingdom too sank into slumber. Dreams drifted through cottages and halls alike. Dreams of feasts, of games, of bridges, of treasure chests filled not with jewels, but with kindness. The night was heavy with peace, wrapped in gratitude, soft as a blanket drawn over weary shoulders. And in that silence, deeper than any he had ever known, MrBeast felt what it meant to give. Not for recognition, not for fame, but for love, as timeless as the stars.